Hello, this is Bo Kim with the Bigger Cash Flow podcast. I'd like to welcome everybody to this video that I'm about to do on analyzing your first rental property. So now that we have discussed setting goals, finding a good rental market, and interviewing members of your investment team, whether that be a realtor, an agent, property manager, contractor, and lender, it's time to analyze some deals, right? So, as mentioned previously, members of your investment team can be a turnkey provider, meaning they handle the acquisition, the rehab, and managing your rental property. So they're like a one-stop shop, right? So there's pros and cons to this, but in today's video, I want to show you if you get deal flow from turnkey providers, how to analyze those deals to see if it might be a good fit for your portfolio. So remember that you have to do your own due diligence when it comes to analyzing a rental property. So you have to preset your criteria and not simply rely on a pro forma sent from another investor or turnkey provider. So I want to walk you through how I normally get my deal flow. And I think I mentioned it in previous blog posts that I'm subscribed to a lot of wholesalers, cash buyers list, a lot of brokers that have built relationships with, and also turnkey providers. So this was an email sent to me from one of my turnkey providers in Kansas City, Missouri. And this is a single family house on Stark Avenue, zip code 64138. And the purchase price is about $105,000 for a 3-bed, 1.5 bath. And it rents at 1,025, which is at or around the 1% rule for those of you who are following my blogs. So this is my rental property analyzer, and you can go ahead and request this from me at my website, biggercashflow.com. Under free resources, go to cash flow deal analyzer and simply just, send me your email address and I'll be more than happy to send this over to you. So what I do here is I have three sections that I fill out. One of it is the pro forma. The other ones is the 50% rule. And the last one is my own numbers, right? And let me walk you through each set of numbers that I'm about to populate here. So the pro forma is basically a projection sent to you by an investor who's trying to sell their property, a broker, or a turnkey provider in this case. They're sending you, hey, this is the purchase price. This is what it should rent for. Here are some of my assumptions as it relates to expenses. And therefore, this should be a projected cash on cash return if you're leveraging, or this should be the cap rate if you're buying it all cash. So what I do is I like to compare and contrast and put the pro forma of what they're telling me. I also like to apply the 50% rule, which I can discuss a little bit further down the road, and my own numbers. So I'm going to normalize expenses based on my own research and then populate it here to see how it compares and contrasts. So first of all, let's go through the mechanics of this spreadsheet, and I want to explain to you what I'm looking at. So here you have the purchase price, and this is kind of a given. So the turnkey provider or broker is going to tell you what the purchase price of the property or what the asking price is. Usually, this is a non-negotiable price because, turnkey providers, they do have a baked-in margin that they are looking for when they buy a distressed property, and then they rehab it, and they quote unquote flip it to the end user, which is an investor, not a retail buyer, right? So typically these are non-negotiable, but you can always, build a relationship with a turnkey provider. Maybe you're a repeat buyer, so they might give you, $1,000 off, $2,000 off, or maybe they might pay for your inspection. You never know. The answer is always going to be no if you don't ask. So if you think you have a good relationship, or if there is some room in the budget, feel free to ask, but you might not get a discount. Next, you have the down payment here. And I'm basing it off on assuming that the buyer is going to want to go through a conventional lender, Fannie Mae loan. So for single family, that's 20% down. And for duplexes, 2 to 4 units, you're going to be required to put 25% down. So this is a single family property. So I put 20% down. Appraisals, sometimes people put it with the closing costs. So it really depends. If it's not including in your estimated closing cost, that's where I would put it here. I want to capture all of the expenses so that there's no surprise to my numbers. Inspection, I didn't put anything here for the pro forma and the 50% rule because that wasn't provided, but I'm going to put it in my own numbers. And this, again, it varies. So ask around your investor circle and ask who is a reputable inspector, what type of inspections have they done? Are they primarily doing, investor related rentals, or is it typically retail buyers? Is it commercial property? What's their experience like? Do they have specific licenses, and what's covered, right? It might be a general home inspection, or it might include termite, radon, all that things. So you want to check with them. And the price varies. So you want to see if you can, get an investor friendly inspector, because that's going to be different from a typical home buyer, a primary residence. Next, you have the septic. And basically, any property that you purchase, you should include a sewer inspection or septic inspection, especially if the property is not connected to a sewer system. Depending on the local municipalities or the city, it's going to have different rules and regulations in terms of what the owner is responsible for if there are issues, right? Older homes, they might have the sewer lines, move throughout the years, or there might be tree roots that, pierce it and grow within it, and there might be blockage. And some of these pipes, they're just like older and they might just have normal wear and tear. So you typically want to snake it. It doesn't cost that much, maybe $200, but it might save you a couple $1,000s down the road. Here you have closing costs. The pro forma that they sent me, they put $1,500. I don't know if they're expecting me to buy it all cash, but typically, as a general rule of thumb, I use 4%, which you're going to see over here. And that's based on my experience buying multiple properties. I bought 12 units by myself and 4 units with a partner so far. And these are actual numbers here. You're going to see, just by summing up these fixed typical closing costs on a $100,000 property, I'm already at about $2,700. And that's not including the prepaid escrow items, which could run you up another, $1,500 to $2,000, depending on the taxes and insurance. So that's why I feel like 4 to 5% of the purchase price is a good rule of thumb. So to me, this is a little bit low, but we'll get to that later. So once you have identified the down payment, the inspection, the closing cost, you're going to get to the estimated cash to close. And basically, this is a sum of the down payment and all these numbers up here. And this is the amount of money that you're typically going to have to bring to the table. Now, this might change once you get closer to the closing date. It's not going to fluctuate too much in my experience, but it might go down $1,000 depending on some of these estimated closing costs that once finalized, it might end up being a little bit cheaper. But I always like to be conservative with my numbers, so I'm going to round up on everything. Now, this is the loan amount. This is basically your purchase price minus your down payment of 20%. So you are going to have a 80% loan to value. Interest rate on the pro forma, they gave me a 5.65% amortized over 30 years or 360 months. Projected rent. So when it comes to rent, there's going to be a couple things that you want to do. And I'll go through this exercise with you where you can use various online resources to research the rent. But the projected rent that they have provided me is $1,050 every month. Management fees, this really depends. I've seen anything from 8 to 12%. Um, you don't want to always cheap out on the management fees. I've seen, flat $50 rates, and those are great for properties that are above $500 in rent, because that's 10%. So anything above that you get to quote unquote keep. But you don't want to cheap out on this, because you get what you paid for. And your property manager, it's kind of one of those difficult jobs where you're dealing with the tenants and you're dealing with the owners. So, you want to pay them enough where, they're going to really do a good job and take care of your property, because, 5% isn't going to break the bank with your pro forma. But if you end up getting a bad property manager, your property is not going to cash flow. Next, you have the estimated taxes. They have provided $93.50. This is a monthly charge. And insurance, $540 per year. Maintenance and capex. So these two things are reserves. So they're basically assumptions where every month we want to tuck away a certain percentage of the rents, because we know that we're going to need to use them in the future. For example, maintenance items could be, leaks in the bathroom. They might be, you have to, replace some carpet. You might need to do some new paint on the trims. You may need to paint a wall. You might need to replace some lighting, basic things like that. Those are some maintenance items. CapEx items are going to be your big capital expenditures, such as a roof, a furnace, AC unit, or the entire HVAC system. It might be foundation work. So those are some of your big dollar items. If you have to replumb the whole house, it might be $7,000 to $12,000. So you want to reserve for it. I've seen people do 5% if they think it's completely renovated. I've seen as high as 12% or 14% if they think there's going to be some deferred maintenance. Vacancy, on the other hand, this is an estimate, again, based on how long they think the property is going to be vacant. So if it's 7%, they're assuming that, what is it, 74 times 12. So that's about $900. That's slightly under 1 month's rent. So they're assuming for maybe 3.5 weeks, the property might be vacant, right, out of the year. And I think that's a reasonable assumption. It might, turn quicker than that. So if your property is in great shape, let's say that somebody moves out in May. And if the property is in good shape, a turn can be done in maybe like 3 days. And if the property is in a great neighborhood, you might already have people lined up to move in 2 weeks later. So maybe you just have a 2-week vacancy. But one thing that you got to realize is you have to check on the agreement that you have with your property manager, because if you agree to pay them a lease-up fee, then you're going to have to end up paying, maybe 1 month's rent or 50% of 1 month's rent. In this example, that will be another $500 to $800 on top of that vacancy. So that's actually going to double, right? So in that case, that should have been 14%. If you think it's going to be vacant for 3 weeks, and you're also going to have to pay a lease-up fee. Not a lot of people account for the lease-up fee in their pro formas, but I think that's something to consider based on the property manager you're using. On the flip side, I've seen people use maybe a lower vacancy of maybe 5% because they have a property manager that gets 2-year leases. So they assume that they're not going to have a vacancy every year. Maybe they're going to have it every 2 years or 1.5, 18 months. And it's going to average out for the long duration of your buy and hold strategy. So it really depends on your strategy, the property manager, the neighborhood, and the type of property you have. So I would just consider all of those things when you're coming up with a percentage. And you always want to be more conservative than light. So I typically go with 8%. Utilities and landscaping, this depends on, if everything is separately metered for a duplex, then utilities, the tenants are on their own. If they're not separately metered on a duplex, then the landlord is responsible, at least in the markets that I invest in, for paying for, like the water, sewer, and some of those common costs, right? Now, you definitely do want to factor those in because that's going to hit your cash on cash return. If you think, oh, utilities, it's only going to be like $50, and I'm not going to worry about it. Well, let's think about that. Let's put $50 in here. That just drops the cash on cash to 6% from 8.5%. So that's a big dip. And that might be the critical factor where you're like, oh, this is not a good deal compared to these other 3 deals that I've been looking at. So you want to factor in everything and you want to be conservative. And I'm not saying be too conservative to the fact where you're like, there are no deals out there. There are deals out there, but you just want to not fudge the numbers where you're so eager to take down a deal and you're just making everything look better than they actually are. But when you look back on it, you're actually making half of what you thought you would. So that's not in the, boat that you want to be in later down the road. Here, so you have your income before your principal and interest. So that's basically, you want to tally up all of these expenses. It's about $400, and you subtract the rent and you're going to get $650. So if you would have bought this property based on their projections without a mortgage, it's going to provide you with a $650 monthly income. And that's, no chump change, right? And that's going to be your 7.4 cap rate. Now, as investors, we know that the 5 profit centers, one of it being L, leverage, you're able to only put 20% down and have an income producing property where the tenant is paying for all of these expenses, right? And the mortgage, when you extrapolate it over 30 years or amortize it over 30 years, I should say, it's going to be $489 per month. And this is using, your monthly payment formula for amortized interest. And your net income is going to be $160 after you pay your mortgage and all your expenses. So this is the net amount that you're going to pocket each month. And when you do that calculation, this cash on cash calculation basically takes this net income over a period of a year and you divide it by the cash to close. So all the money that you invested into this property, and this is going to be your annualized return. So the debt coverage ratio is basically the total cash flow divided by the mortgage payments to the lender. And banks typically look for a 1.2 debt coverage ratio or above, because anything under 1% means that you're losing money each month on your investment. So you want to be as high as possible. Now down here, we have the physical attributes. These are all items that the turnkey provider has told me. So I'm going to populate this and I'm going to check it when I do my research. Here you have the 50% rule. Basically, it's taking the same information from the pro forma, and instead of doing all these assumptions and looking at whatever they told us, this is a quick and dirty way to figure out if this is going to cash flow. And you do that by just taking 50% of rents, chopping it in half, and taking the mortgage out of it, and this is your net income, $16, right? That's much less than the $160 that you're projected to make on the pro forma. And some people are a fan of this rule because it's just a really quick way to do it. But honestly, I'm not a fan of the 50% rule because this varies from market to market, right? And it also depends on the county that assesses your taxes. If you look here, taxes are going to be your single biggest piece of expense. And if one property was assessed at $600, and if another property in the same neighborhood was assessed at $1,200, you're going to lose $600 more of cash flow each year. But because they're both renting it out at $1,000 a pop, if you take 50% of that, that's going to be very different from property A and property B. So you want to be very mindful of that and always go for the actuals. Now, I want to show you how I researched this property. And let's go through the due diligence package that they have sent over to me. So I like to use Redfin. It's one of my more often used sites for all of my real estate research. And I did a quick search on 9404 Stark. And here, they have the Redfin estimate, the last list price on the MLS, and some of the property details. So right off the bat, I noticed that it's a 3 bed and 1 bath, but it's being marketed as a 1.75 or 2 bath. So that tells me they must have done some work to, install a shower or a bathtub, because it used to be just 3 and 1. Down here, you're going to see some sold comps nearby. You're going to see a little map on Google on where this property is located. It's near South Kansas City. And there is a big corporation nearby called Cerner. And they're basically a electronic health record solutions and servicing company. They have about 25,000 employees, and it's a really big employer in this neighborhood, something to consider. Here we see the tax record. This is the land. This is the additions. This is the tax record. Another thing that I noticed right off the bat is that it's $1,122 on 2017. That's what we have here, but we're here in 2019, right? So I can guarantee you that this has gone up. So we got to check that out. Here we see that the square footage is 925. This is the livable square foot, and it's a 3-in-1. We got to verify the bath. And the year built is 1959. All of this information we should be able to verify on county records. Here they have a hot water central cooling. So they're not window units. They have a HVAC system. They have a 1-car garage. Floodplain. This is very important, guys. So, earlier days when I was researching this, I made the mistake of not understanding, if it's in a flood zone. So sometimes even a seller doesn't know if the property is in a flood zone. Generally speaking, they should know, because they should be paying for flood insurance premiums, which are ridiculously high. In my market of Indianapolis, I think I was quoted like $2,500 a year for a property that rents for like $900. So definitely it's not going to cash flow. So you want to make sure if a property is in a flood zone or not. So take a look at the FEMA website. You can go to freeflood.net or msc.fema.gov, and you can do a search for yourself, because those are going to designate whether they're in a flood zone. And lastly, your insurance. Your insurance broker or agent should be able to look up this property and tell you if it's in a flood zone. So those are the things that I look for. So let's start to normalize this, right? These are my numbers. I'm going to start punching in my own numbers. So the purchase price, I'm just going to assume that it's fixed. They're not going to offer me a negotiated price. Down payment, 20%. Inspection, there's a guy that I use for $320 in Kansas City, so I put that in there. Appraisal, it's included in my closing costs, so I'm not necessarily going to put another $600 there. And general rule of thumb, I'm going to put 4%, because as I mentioned, when I sum this up, it's about $2,600, and I know prepaid cost could be anywhere from $15 to $2,000. So I think this is a safe estimate. Estimated cash to close, it's going to be about $26,000. That's slightly higher than the projected pro forma that this turnkey provider has given me. The loan amount, it's going to be the same, because it's the same 20% down payment. Interest rate, this is also important, right? Turnkey providers, they're not necessarily financing these properties. They might be buying it with hard money or private funds. So they might not be apprised of the most recent interest rates that go up every quarter, especially in 2018, it's gone up tremendously. So this is actually based on the most recent quote that I got at 6% interest on 20% down. And I have a credit of 750 or above. So this is probably one of the best, non-owner occupied interest rates that I can get from a national lender. If you're able to get a, better interest rate from a local bank or credit union, if you're in that market, kudos to you. I'm actually out of state, so I have to rely on certain lenders who would lend to me as an out-of-state investor, and 6% is the best that I'm getting these days. Projected interest, projected rent, we have 1050. And a great way to validate this rent, there's various websites, but my favorite is Rentometer. And basically, you can go to this website. Let's do it together. Rentometer. And there is the paid, pro version, but there's also the free version. And if you're just doing this to, compare and just get an idea, I think the free version is totally fine. Is it 134? 138. The rent, they said it's 1050, so I'm going to put that in there. It's a 3-bed. Let's analyze it. Let's see how far. Are we cold? Are we warm? Are we hot? So based on 43 bedroom rentals within 12 months in a 2-mile radius, and this might be misleading because, I know this area pretty well. And if you go up here, it's Raytown, and it's part of Missouri that has better schools than at least this area. So the rent you could see here in the orange, it's a little bit higher. A lot of these yellow, and it gets colder, it gets greener as you go towards the 470 or the 435, because these are considered, rougher neighborhoods than this area over here. So the median rent is 950. So it's very well that you could get 1050, right? Or you can go as low as 755 in this example. But I think based on the pictures that I've seen, you have to also take into consideration the level of rehab, right? If a property has a new roof, new HVAC, new cosmetics like new flooring and paint and trims and all of that, a renter is going to probably look at that house and might be willing to put in, $50 more in rent a month. So if this is the median, you have to consider that the medium house might not be in the same condition of your turnkey renovated house. So that's what Rentometer says. And you can also check out other websites such as Craigslist. You can go to Zillow or HotPads. That's another one. And all of these websites are going to do the same thing. They're going to provide you with some rough rental rates in this area. But my most favorite way to verify this is just talk to your property manager. The property manager who lives in that area that manages about, 200-300 rentals, they're going to be very, well versed in the current market, how much you can get for a certain type of finishing or certain type of amenities, and what school districts, what neighborhoods, all of those things a property manager should be able to tell you. And if they can't tell you that, you have to run and find another property manager, because that's what they do, right? That's their bread and butter, figuring out the right rental rates where they can have a long-term tenant, because you don't want to overcharge them either, because you're going to have constant turnover. And one of the biggest wealth killer for a landlord is constant turnover. So went off on a little tangent there, but that's another great way to, validate this projected rent. So I'm going to go with them and keep it at 1050. I think that's a reasonable rate. Management fee, I put 10% because that's what my guy charges me. But like I said, you can go from anywhere from 8 to 12%, and you don't want to cheap out on this. You want to make sure that you have the right property manager who's going to take care of your property and the tenants, because that's how you're going to make money in the long run. Now, taxes. I mentioned that one of the things that came to mind was that it was looking at 2017 rates when you're looking at the estimated taxes. So I'm going to go over here, and this is Jackson County, Missouri. This is the county website, and you can do a property search. And I already typed it in here, 9404 Stark. Click submit. You have a couple owners here, but this is the parcel. You want to click on the parcel number, and boom, here we go. So they made a payment last month for, what do you see here? $12.59. So the year before it was $11.22, but in 1 year it's gone up $130. And you want to consider that, because look at here, the past 3 years it hasn't gone up. But this year it has gone up, and these are actual numbers. So even if you're not conservative enough to bump it up to 1,300, you want to at a minimum use 1259 when you're analyzing your deal, which is what I put in here. Insurance, the best way to do it is actually get quotes from insurance agents or brokers. You know, NREIG, I think, is a national one. I personally use RDIS. And if you want the contact for my insurance broker, please, shoot me an email. I'll be more than happy to refer you guys. He's been awesome. He does all my properties. But yeah, I have a couple properties nearby in this area, and I think 540 is a great estimate. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put 540. Maintenance and CapEx, I do 8 and 8 for turnkey properties. Again, based on the level of rehab that they have. And I think this is a great opportunity right now to take a look at some of the rehab pictures and kind of show you why I think these this property at least warrants an 8% maintenance. So you can see here they did a great job just cleaning it out, put new carpet in, put some laminate flooring there in the back. You have new neutral two-tone paint. I really like this color. I think it's just clean and crisp. Painted the door, new blinds. It's very generic. Nothing pops out at you. I like it. You have new appliances in there. Cabinets seem fine. You also want to check out and talk with your property manager to see, hey, if we install, granite countertops, do you think we're going to get $50 more in rent? And kind of do an analysis to see what your break even is. If you think it's going to get you $50 more in rent and it only costs you $2,000 to do it, then you might want to do it. Not saying that you have a say in it when you're buying from a turnkey provider, but it's something to consider when you're doing your rehabs. So going on here, pictures look pretty great. New carpet in all of the rooms. Bathroom has been remodeled. So this is one of the bathrooms, right? So in Redfin, we saw that it was a 3-bed, 1-bath, but now they're marketing it for a 3-bed, 2-bath. So we have a full bathroom here, another bedroom. Let's see where that other bathroom is. Here we go. So here's your second bathroom. It's a 1.75 because it doesn't have a tub, so it's not a full bath, but you have a standing shower. But to me, it does make no difference. It's a 3 and 2 for me. But it might make a difference when the appraiser, depending on the appraiser, they might kind of shed some points off of it. But it has a full basement here. It's unfinished, meaning that it's not, livable as is, but it looks like a dry basement. Looks like they did some dry lock-in. They have a new hot water heater. They have a new furnace. And these are all things that they have told me that we need to verify through an inspection. They also put a new roof on it. It looks like they painted the outside, and it has a 1-car garage. Having a garage and a carport, it does affect the value of the property. So you definitely want to make sure that if they're giving you a price based on a property with a garage, and you come find out that it's just a carport, you definitely want to either see if you can negotiate the price or, figure out a way that it's going to hit its appraised value. And we'll get to that in a moment here. So property looks great. So once I normalize my numbers, you're ending up with $120 in net income after you deployed $26,000 to close. And that equates to about, 5.5 cash on cash return. So one of my metrics that I use is I want to go for at least 12% cash on cash return. So, this to me, it's not a winner in that regards. But for people who are looking for renovated properties and they don't care about hitting certain cash on cash metrics, they might consider this. They might be okay with a 6% return because it provides a hedge against inflation and it's a relatively safer asset than the stock market, which has been doing terrible these days. But that's another story. So you have to stick with your predefined criteria. As mentioned in my notes over here, I'm looking for at least a $200 net in cash flow. And that's when I'm financing, 20% down. If I'm doing the BRRRR method and I'm taking all of my money out, then I don't really care if I'm only making $100 or $150 because I have no money in the deal. It's an infinite return. But when I'm financing 12%, then I kind of want a $200 net monthly cash flow. And that's just because I want the property to be self-sustainable. I don't want it to be a property where it's only cash flowing $50 and it's also still giving me a 12% return. Well, for me, it's too thin where if something goes wrong, then I have to continually put money into it. So I think 12% and $200 in net cash flow, that gives me enough buffer room for it to be self-sustainable. Neighborhood rating, I'm looking for a C plus or above. And please note that each neighborhood is rated differently. It might be an A or B or C based on the number of renters versus owners or based on crime rates, school, or other statistics. One way you can check out the crime rates is go to Trulia.com, and Trulia has a heat map, and it's like a red, amber, orange, green. Let's actually do it right now. So if you go here, and you can see here, Trulia has a way different estimate, right? It already has that 2-bath, so that probably paid a factor in increasing the ARV in Trulia's eyes, whereas Stark here, it's only estimated as $66,000. So everybody values it differently, which is exactly why you want to do your own due diligence. So if you go to crime here in this neighborhood, the darker blue it's the more higher crime. So if it's light, it means there's less reported crimes. And one caveat to this is that in more rougher neighborhoods, interestingly enough, people might be less prone to call and report crimes, where in nicer neighborhoods, they want to watch out for their neighbors and they want to keep it crime free. So they might actually report it more frequently. So that's something that you want to consider. So not necessarily looking at the volume of calls, but you want to look at, what the type of calls are. If it's, burglary with an armed weapon, or where it's violent crimes where somebody was shot and killed, that's very different from a where there was like a domestic disturbance. That might happen in any neighborhood, but in terms of break-ins and murders and things like that, those violent type of crimes, those are things that I look for and try to avoid. Property type, single family, I try to look for 3-bedroom, 1-bath or more with a garage. Some markets like Memphis, it's more common to have a carport instead of a garage. So something to look out for, but it does play a value in terms of the market rents that you're going to get. And also think of it, if you're the tenant, right? If you live in a market like Kansas City, where it's raining and snowing at times and it's very cold, you might not want to park your car outside and have, ice all over it, where you could put it in a car, in a garage, and keep it a little bit warmer in the winter. So those are things to consider. Like if it doesn't snow as much, maybe in that market, you might not care if it has a garage. But in Kansas City, I think it's much nicer if you have a garage. It's much more appealing to the tenant. So those are some of the things that we looked at. We looked at, management fees, taxes, insurance, breaking down all of these expenses, some of the general rules of thumb, and the comparison between what they gave me and my own numbers. You can see that they're very, ambitious in terms of the cash on cash they think they're going to hit at 8.5. My conservative numbers are telling me it's 5.5, and it's not like I went overly conservative, right? So it's very important to set your criteria and compare against it to make sure that you're not buying a property in hopes of these fantastic returns that you're never going to get. So it's very important that you look at it. Now, there's some of these assumptions that you're going to be using, like the interest rate, unless you get actual quotes, or vacancy and maintenance. So again, please do your due diligence and look at the scope of work. So in this case, let's take a quick scope of work to see how much capex has been replaced. Here they did some demo and trash haul off. They installed new tub, valve, and plumbing in the bath. I think this is where they expanded it to 2 baths. They got rid of some wood rot, new hot water tank. It's not in here, but I think they did a new HVAC when I looked at it. Yep, new HVAC. It had a new roof on it as well. They applied some new sheetrock, new carpet, luxury vinyl planks, tile. All of these were, all the finishes were done. So they did a lot of work to the property, at least when I saw it in the pictures. But all of these are going to be verified in the inspections, which I'm going to do a separate video just on inspections because that's a whole nother animal. This is just before you make the offer. And I think, because I explained it over time, it probably took me much longer than it normally takes me. But if I were to just, take the information from the turnkey provider and populate this data, I can do it in less than 15 minutes. So this is a great way when you get these weekly emails from your turnkey providers, populate it in 15 minutes and give them an offer. If you're ready to buy, make that jump quickly because there's going to be 100 other people trying to make the same offer. And you have to be able to quickly tell if this is a go or no go decision. So I hope this video helped you guys out. If you have any questions, feedback, or comments for me, shoot me an email at bo@biggercashflow.com, and I'd love to help you out.